Negative externalities are not something that the government wants within its economy. They have quite significant costs for an economy, and it is important that we can show this graphically. This is a diagram that is conceptually based around the idea that you understand marginality. So the idea that if you produce one more unit of something, or you consume one more unit of something, so one more vaccination, does that have a positive benefit to you in society? One more litre of chemicals, what is the impact on the environment of that extra production? So to start with, we're going to draw a diagram to show the impact of a negative externality. So we will draw a pair of axes, but because we're talking about costs and benefits, we will label the vertical axis the vertical axis pounds and the horizontal axis quantity. So what we have to do when we're drawing this diagram is keep something constant, and so we're going to assume there are no external benefits in this market, which obviously is a bit of a falsehood, but it is a way of ensuring that we can draw the diagram without too many other factors. So we are employing this idea of ceteris paribus. So if we imagine there are no external benefits, the marginal social benefit is equal to the marginal private benefit of that good. So what we would assume is as we produced more, the private costs of a firm will increase. Now you can see I'm drawing them here in quite a linear fashion, so I'm assuming that there aren't the benefits of economies of scale or diseconomies of scale, etc. So we are assuming that the cost of each extra unit is the same. Now the principle of externalities is that if you are producing something and they're creating negative externalities, as you produce more and more, the social costs and the external costs become higher and higher. And the more you produce, those social costs really start to grow and the external costs really start to grow. And so we would diverge the lines apart. So if we were to look at that being marginal social costs, the distance between the two lines would be the external cost within that market. So we are able to put a couple of equilibriums in here. So let's just think about what each of those would be. So for socially optimal production, we would want the marginal social cost to be the same as the marginal social benefit. So if we think about where that is on the diagram, that is at QSO. So from the point of view of society, we would want production to be at QSO. So if you imagine this is for chemical production, etc. But from a firm's point of view, they don't consider the external costs because essentially they're not going to be charged for them in the first instance. They will be considering their private costs, so their wages, their rent, their packaging, their capital costs, and then they'll be considering their private benefit. So they'll be considering the profits that come to them. So if you consider this point here, which I'm just going to put a little blue circle around, that is where the marginal private costs are the same as the marginal private benefits. Now, if we consider those two lines, if you look at the marginal private benefit line and the marginal private cost line up until that point, so starting from quantity 0 and moving in that direction, you should be able to see that the private benefit is higher than the private cost. So the private benefit is higher than the private cost. However, as soon as we go past that point, as soon as we go past the point which we'll call QF, i.e. the quantity the firm wants to produce, if we went to the right of that line, the private cost of an additional unit would exceed the private benefit. So QF is the amount that the firm would like to produce. But at that point, we have significant external costs. We have significant external costs in that market, and that can be seen by the red line there. So what the government wants to do is it wants to reduce the amount of external costs. It wants to move from QF to QSO. And it would do that through either taxation or legislation or regulation or a combination. But as you can see, if we are able to lessen production, and we only need to know the diagram for production in terms of negative externalities, you should be able to see each time I draw a red line as I'm moving from QF to QSO that the amount of the external cost is diminishing. In fact, when I get to the point where we are socially optimal, the externality has disappeared. However, if the government doesn't manage to do that, then we will have within our economy, our society, what is known as a welfare loss. So that is a negative externalities diagram. As I say, it relies upon you understanding the concept of marginality, and it also relies upon you understanding the difference between what costs are private to a firm and what costs are external to a firm. So if we were again to look at this diagram in the context of chemical production, MPC, the marginal private cost to a chemical company might be additional wages, additional capital costs, but we think about the external cost, which we add on to the marginal private cost to get to the marginal social cost, as being the pollution in rivers, the effects on soil in the local area, the air quality, which in effect has impacts upon local health, local river levels, stocks of fish, etc. So it all depends on the context. So it's very important for you to look at the question and to consider the context, but that is a negative externalities diagram.